This video is a radio broadcast from Australia. The propagandist from the West is interviewing a Australian who went over to witness the voting in Russia.
Probably been following the story that's come out of Port Hedland. It's in relation to a Port Hedland councillor who was overseeing, as a scrutineer, the Russian elections. Of course, he appeared on state TV as well, off the back of that, to make some brief comments. His name's Adrian McRae. He joins us on the line. Thanks for your time, Adrian.
Yeah, good morning, Gary. How are you, mate?
Good. Just be out of interest, before you went to Russia, what was your impression of the Russian leadership under Putin?
Look, that was something I was really interested to understand. Look, I've got Russian friends, and most of my friends that are from Russia support him. But look, I didn't know. I listened to a lot of the mainstream narrative, which has made me very curious, because I guess after the last 4 years of craziness in Australia and a lot of the lies and suppression of the media, I was genuinely interested to go over and see if what we hear is true. So that was kind of a big part of me, forking out the cash to go over and do it.
Did you ask any questions, for example, about whether Russia played a role in the downing of MH17, the Malaysian Airlines flight where 298 people died?
I don't know who I'd be asking. I wasn't over there meeting the FSB or the KGB. I was over there to be an independent observer of an election. So that's,
Well,
I've got no clue. I'm not sure who you think I'd be talking to that would know answer to that question. Asking the public people. Of course, everyone in Russia thinks that was done by Ukraine militias. So again, I can't.
Well, there you go. So you just said it then. Everyone in Russia thinks that you spoke to. Do you?
But that's over the years. That's not on my recent trip. I didn't. It's not a subject I brought up.
Do you think that Russia played a role in the downing of a civilian plane that killed 298 people?
Well, personally, I'm sort of on the fence, but I would say, just the way that the Western media pushed it that way, I tend to not believe it, because the lies that the Western media pushed on us so hard the last 4 years in particular, it's opened my eyes a lot to the nonsense coming out of the mainstream.
You're not prepared to accept that Russia was responsible.
What do you mean accept? Do you know that they shot it down? Do you?
I have heard the communications between the Russian military personnel where they accept that it was one of their missiles. Yeah.
Ukraine is full of old Soviet missiles, so it can. How do you make that? How do you make that distinction?
Okay. Well, do you accept whether Russia invaded Ukraine?
Of course, they invaded Ukraine. What do you think? But there's.
And what do you think of that?
Yeah. Mate, I think I'm an anti-war activist. Anyone who knows me. I'm out leading marches and speaking in front of people, because I oppose exactly this. But we can't pretend that the West were not involved in causing that war. Everyone speaks of it. I hosted an event for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in October, and he speaks about it often, about the West's aggressive push towards expanding NATO to the east and wanting to bring militarise and add to NATO Ukraine right on Russia's borders. I'm sure you understand the Cuban Missile Crisis, what caused that, and here we are doing exactly the same thing ourselves, 50 years later. So
exactly.
It's embarrassing to say that, Russia didn't have reason to go and invade Ukraine. Of course they had reason to invade Ukraine. Do I support any war? I absolutely despise war. It actually repulses me. I'll do anything I can to stop wars. But to pretend, as you're saying, that Russia's gone in to invade Ukraine without reason is absurd, and it's an insult to your listeners that you would even suggest such a thing.
What was the reason?
How long have we got on this interview? I'd love to talk to you about this.
What was the reason that Russia invaded Ukraine, leading to mass deaths and displacement of a country?
Wait till you hear this
that
answer.
Otherwise was acting in a very peaceful way.
He's going to wish he didn't ask.
Okay, you would hardly say acting in a very peaceful way. So you would understand that the Under-Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland, in 2014 boasted about spending $5 billion to organise a coup of the Maidan in 2014 to overthrow a democratically elected government of Ukraine of Yanukovych. and then begin aggressively pushing to marginalise those Russian-speaking folks of eastern Ukraine, particularly around Lugansk and Donetsk, and they've been bombed using NATO and US and Western supplied shells for 10 years, from 8 years, 2014 onwards. Thousands upon thousands of people being killed in Donbass, innocent civilians, Russian-speaking natives in eastern Ukraine, and you think with any sense of decency that Russia should sit back and let that continue to happen? I'm blown away that you would even suggest such a thing.
All right. What about the execution of people who are enemies of the Russian president? What do you?
Okay, tell me one.
Well,
tell me one.
What about Navalny? The way he was.
You just shot yourself in the foot. Navalny, even Budanov, the head of the Ukraine Secret Service, has come out this week and said, "I'm sorry, guys, but Navalny died of a blood clot." The bloke had 5 Pfizer jabs and boasted about it. He dies of a blood clot in a Russian
He died of
prison,
Pfizer.
and here you are saying that he was killed by the Russian government. That is the most absurd, ridiculous line to come out with. I'm actually embarrassed. I'm actually embarrassed for you that you even said it. Navalny was an extremist. Hyper. You think Putin is aggressive? This guy was 10 times aggressive. He even said on the record that all Russian Muslims are cockroaches. They should be treated like annoying flies and exterminated with the back of a slipper or a fly swatter or even a revolver. And he's a guy that if he was in Australia, he would be in jail for hate crimes. He would be in jail for extremism. The bloke had corruption. His whole family, him and his brother working at Aeroflot long before they ever got into politics, had been in and out of jail for their corrupt behaviour and ripping up the state through working in the national airline. Here we call him an opposition leader. The Russian government is very similar to Australia and the US in a way. It's got a lower house called the State Duma, it's got an upper house called the Council of Federation, which we call the Senate, and then they've got a president, similar to the system to the way the US works. Now, Navalny, at the height of his fame, never polled more than 3%. He never even had any party he ever represented, doesn't even have a single seat in 450 seats in the lower house. So people here would call him an opposition leader. It's so insulting to the intelligence of the Australian public that narrative has been allowed to manifest. It's absolutely absurd.
Just
Propaganda.
in terms of going to Russia, I mean, how did that come about for you?
Look, I had a chance lunch I was meeting with some friends in Sydney, and the Russian ambassador in early January. He was in Sydney for some meetings, and anyway, I was talking to him, and because I've scrutineered the federal election last year, I've run in federal politics. I was considering at that time throwing my hat in the ring for a count.
Oh, sorry, that's not us. That's just that the line's dropped out. We'll try and get Adrian back. Oh, yeah. Sorry, mate, you just dropped out then. You're still there.
I'm sorry?
You're right, you're back.
And so he mentioned that the Russian election was coming on and got talked about scrutineers. And I said, what do people have to do to become a scrutineer? And he said, well, look, if you're interested, then I can ask the question. So he put it out there. Next thing I got an invite from the Council of Federation, which is the Senate of the upper house of Russia, saying if you're willing to pay all your own costs and come over here, then we'd be willing to run you through the process, and you can walk and go through all our voting booths. And I was like, okay, I'm really interested to see this. So I've got friends in Russia, so I went over early, and I got to meet up with lots of friends over there. And then when the election happened, I spent 4 days, actually 5 days, working in and around the 3-day election process, and I had my mind blown by what I got to see.
This is amazing.
As far as you're concerned,
That's how they do the elections in Russia.
The result that came Putin's way is purely on his popularity in Russia.
100%, and that's literally on the night the election finished. I was invited to a dinner with one of the presidential candidates actually, and just through connections and people I've met while I was there. And I said, I'm really sorry. I actually insulted them. I said, I'm really sorry, but I'm actually going to go over and above, and I want to go in and count the paper ballots, because you can't count the electronic ballots, which is about roughly half. I think about 40% of people vote electronically. But I wanted to count the paper ballots. It's very simple counting, because they just put a cross in the box, very similar to the Australian referendum. So I went back 8 p.m. and I worked through till 2 a.m. the following morning on the Monday morning, Monday morning, and literally sat there and watched the count. And I chose the region I chose, the voting booth that chose, because it's very similar to Australia, they do it in the primary schools and secondary schools where they do the voting booths. And at first they were like, oh, well, this is not normal that someone comes in from and watches this, and like, oh, that's a bit odd that they don't want, they're a little bit nervous about letting me in. They called up the chain said, of course let him in, let him give me full access. So here I was watching the voting count, and literally 1 minute after they tipped the ballot boxes on the table, they pushed all the tables together to make a big table so they could tip all these voting boxes, all the ballot boxes upside down on the table, and they broke the seals. And then suddenly they get a call from Central, stop the counting. And here I am thinking, okay, something's dodgy going on here. I'm finally going to see something dodgy. All it was they have 3D cameras in all 98,000 voting booths across the country. And just to quote last night on Current Affair, I said,
3D
I got that number wrong. It's
video
98,000
of all
voting
the
booths. Every
county.
of the 98,000 voting booths across Russia, they have 3D cameras that everyone in Russia can log in, and they can watch, and they can drag the camera around. They can look at any part of the voting booth they want to look at. And they can rewind. They can rewind the camera back 3 days to look at everything that's happened in that voting booth over the last 3 days, any angle. But the table where they set the tables up, they couldn't see over someone's shoulder, and they couldn't see the hands of 2 of the 10 or a dozen people sitting around the table that were sorting the ballots out. So we had to rearrange they rearranged the tables, and then they said, "How's that?" And they said, "No, still we can't see. There's still one person's shoulder blocking the view." They had to move the tables again. And literally, it's just like never been heard of in the West. No one would ever have done that. Australia, certainly no way. US, certainly no way. I mean, there's no country in the world that I've ever seen go to such lengths. Anyway, once everyone's hands could be fully seen from the 3D cameras, they re-began the count. Anyway, we watched the count like I said, through till about 2 in the morning. And in Putin's least popular area on the whole Russian landmass, he got just under 80% of the vote.
There you go. That's in his least most popular area. That's pretty.
That's in his least most popular.
That is extraordinary. All right.
It was incredible. So,
how's things in Port Hedland for you, given the publicity that surrounded this visit for you?
Well, look, of course, people have, people watch a lot of the mainstream, and they're like, "Oh, this guy's a Russian spy." It's like, my God, my crime that I've been crucified for in Australian media is because I congratulated the winner of election that I was the only Australian there to watch. I was there with US congressmen. I was there with politicians and members of parliament from over 120 countries around the world. I was there with the longest serving commander of the International Space Station. And like the caliber of people there, it's literally second to none. And they asked, there was like 100 odd people come and spoke the next day. They asked, from these observers and these official observer groups from international human and all these professional election observers that were all speaking. And I was the very last speaker. I was literally the dreg, and I said, "Oh, look, if you want to say something, you can say something too." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm here. I'll say something." So I congratulated, at the end of my 5-minute speech, I congratulated Putin, just like you would congratulate. I've grown up playing rugby, and even if I hated the opposition, I would congratulate the winner after the game. I would always, it was just, I was captain of teams, and that's just something you do. It's good manners, and it's just good sportsmanship. So I congratulated Putin for his unbelievable win.
All
the
right.
next thing, I'm on state telly, and I'm a monster because I said congratulations to Putin. It's like,
So that's
what the hell's going on in this country?
All right. Well, I think it's probably because the majority of people have a whole different view than you do in relation to Vladimir Putin and what he's all about. But Adrian, thanks very much for coming on.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So that's amazing. He covered how they do elections and the history of the last 10 years. Victoria Nuland, the coup d'etat, bombing their own people for 10 years. Beautiful. Go Putin.